The sky above Midgard had been wrong for 3 years. Fimbulwinter had swallowed the world in a slow, grinding cold that the mortals whispered about in firelit longhouses, pulling their furs tighter and sacrificing what little they had to gods who gave nothing back. Snow fell upward in certain valleys. The rivers closest to Jotunheim ran black. Animals migrated in impossible directions, following instincts their bodies had never carried before. The world was ending, and it was doing so quietly, the way all truly terrible things do. Not with a single catastrophic moment, but with 1,000 small wrongnesses accumulating until the weight became unbearable. It was into this broken sky that the tear appeared. It opened without ceremony above the wildwoods, northeast of the Lake of Nine, roughly 200 feet above the tree line. No Bifrost light preceded it. No horn announced it. The fabric of the 9 realms simply parted, the way skin parts around a blade. And through the gap came a single figure in an orange guy, tumbling end over end through an atmosphere he had never breathed before. Son Goku hit the snow-covered canopy of an ancient pine forest like a comet. The impact crater was 30 feet wide. Trees splintered outward in a ring. The snow that had accumulated on the upper branches of surrounding pines launched skyward in a white curtain before drifting back down in slow, spiraling sheets. For a moment, there was total silence, the particular silence of a forest that has just decided to be very, very still. Then Goku sat up, shook pine needles from his hair, and looked around with the expression of a man who has crash-landed in strange places often enough that his first reaction is curiosity rather than panic. "Huh," he said. The air was wrong. Not bad, exactly. It had a clean, ancient quality to it, like breathing beside a waterfall that had been running since before mountains had names. But underneath that cleanness was something else, something layered and heavy, like the smell before a storm, except the storm had been building for centuries and hadn't broken yet. Goku breathed it in and felt his kite shift in response, a subtle realignment, the way a compass needle twitches when it detects a new magnetic field. He had been training in the space between universes, a technique Whis had demonstrated once and strongly advised against attempting alone, and the idea was simple. Locate a pocket of null space between dimensional boundaries. Use it as a training ground where the laws of physics were flexible enough to push beyond normal limits. The execution had been, by Goku's own cheerful admission, not great. He had gotten the entry right. The training had gone well. 3 days of pushing Ultra Instinct past thresholds he hadn't touched before. The exit had involved a miscalculation that Whis would almost certainly describe using the word catastrophic before sighing very deeply. Goku stood, brushing snow from his gi, and extended his senses outward. The energy signatures of this place were unlike anything in his experience. Kai existed here. He could feel that immediately, a relief. But it moved differently. Back home, Ki was essentially an expression of life force, something every living being possessed and martial artists learned to refine into a weapon. Here, the energy had the same base quality, but ran through the world in currents rather than pools, flowing along invisible channels that seemed to connect to larger sources, massive sources, ancient sources. He could feel them like distant suns, burning in directions that didn't correspond to any compass heading he understood. And some of them noticed him back, and the ravens appeared 6 minutes after his landing. 2 of them, black as the space between stars, perching on a broken pine branch at the edge of his crater and watching him with eyes that held something no bird's eyes should contain. Intelligence, yes, but older than intelligence. Observation with intent. Recording with purpose. Goku looked at the ravens. The ravens looked at Goku. "You're not normal birds," he said. They weren't. He could feel it clearly now. A thin thread of energy connecting them to something enormous and cold and very far away. Something that had just become aware of his presence and was already, with the calm efficiency of a being who had survived by being 3 steps ahead of everything. Beginning to think about what to do about it, Goku reached out with instant transmission, searching for familiar Kai signatures. Nothing. No Vegeta. No Gohan. No Bulma. No Beerus sleeping somewhere in the distance. The sensation was genuinely disorienting in a way that crash landing had not been, the universe simply ending at a certain perceptual distance, replaced by those deep, ancient currents of realm energy running through a cosmology that operated on completely different architecture. He was somewhere new. Genuinely, completely new. The ravens took flight simultaneously, arrowing northwest with impossible speed, carrying their report to whatever waited at the other end of that cold, watching thread. Goku watched them go, then looked down at his hands, feeling the subtle pressure of this world's energy against his Kai. It wasn't hostile. It was simply present, the way gravity is present, indifferent to whether you understand it or not. Somewhere in the dark forest around him, something massive moved. Not the raven's master. Something closer, something that had heard the impact and decided, even with the weary discipline of a man who had learned that strange things arriving loudly were rarely harmless, to investigate. Goku smiled. His Kai settled into its resting state, calm and vast and warm against the Fimbul winter cold. Wherever this was, whatever these energies meant, whoever was coming through those ancient trees, this place was interesting. And Son Goku had never been able to resist something interesting. The Wildwoods had a particular quality of silence that Kratos had come to know the way other men knew the faces of their children. He had lived in the shadow of these trees long enough to understand their language. The difference between the silence of a predator stalking and the silence of something so far outside the natural order that the forest itself didn't know how to categorize it. Animals went quiet around Draugr. They went quiet around trolls, and they went quiet around Aesir scouts wearing their disinterest-like armor. This silence was different. This was the silence of the Wildwoods, holding its breath. He had felt the impact 3 miles out. Not heard it, felt it, through the soles of his boots and up through the bones of his legs. A single concussive thud that the earth absorbed with the reluctant patience of something that had been hit before, but not quite like this, where he had been returning from a supply cache near the mountain's eastern face, moving with the economical silence of a man who had spent decades making himself invisible despite his size. The impact had stopped him mid-stride. Atreus had felt it too. The boy had looked up from the trail ahead, hand drifting instinctively toward his bow, and said nothing. Between them passed the particular communication of father and son, who had survived enough to know when words cost more than they were worth. Kratos had handed him the supply pack and pointed back toward the house. Atreus had, predictably, not gone back toward the house. Now they moved together through the tree line at the crater's edge, and Kratos took in the scene with the rapid, cold assessment of a general who had fought wars across 3 continents and 2 pantheons. 30-foot impact radius. Trees shattered outward, not burned, not blasted, shattered, as though something had struck with pure physical force at a velocity that made heat irrelevant. No Bifrost residue. No dark energy from Helheim. No smell of Vanir magic. The snow at the center of the crater was compressed into something approaching ice. The molecular structure of it simply flattened by the weight of whatever had landed. And standing at the center of it, studying his own hands with an expression of calm academic interest, was a man in an orange tunic. Kratos processed this in silence. The stranger was not tall by Norse standards, not imposing in the way that Thor was imposing, that particular physical enormity that the god of thunder wore like a second skin. He was lean and black-haired, built with the kind of functional density that Kratos recognized from a lifetime of studying fighters. Not a body built for display, but a body built for use. Every muscle refined through application rather than vanity. He carried no visible weapons. He had landed hard enough to flatten 30 feet of ancient Midgard forest and was standing with the relaxed posture of a man who had found the whole experience mildly entertaining. The energy coming off him was unlike anything Kratos had encountered in his years in the Norse lands. He had felt divine ichor before, the particular resonant heat of godhood that the Aesir carried like a second heartbeat. He had felt Vanir magic, older and stranger, the deep earth hum of Freya's power. He had felt the world serpent's presence, that incomprehensible vastness. Reality bending slightly at the edges where Jormungandr existed. This was none of those things. This was something that seemed to originate entirely from within the stranger himself. A warm and enormous energy that pulsed with the steady rhythm of absolute physical confidence. It didn't draw from the realm. It didn't connect to Yggdrasil's channels. It simply was, self-contained and vast, or like a sun that had decided to take a walk. Beside him, Atreus had gone very still. Kratos glanced at his son and read something unexpected in the boy's expression. Not fear, not combat readiness. Something closer to recognition, the confused look of a person hearing a word in a language they shouldn't know. His soul, Atreus said quietly, barely a breath. Father, his soul is... I see him, Kratos said. The stranger looked up from his hands and found them immediately, without searching, his eyes moving directly to their position in the tree line, with the casual precision of someone whose senses operated well beyond normal parameters. He raised one hand in a wave that managed to be simultaneously disarming and somehow deeply unnerving, the gesture of a man who had just spotted neighbors across a fence rather than two armed figures emerging from a hostile forest in a world that had been at war for 3 years. Hey, the stranger said, you live around here? Kratos stepped fully out of the tree line. The Leviathan axe was in his hand, not raised, but present. The frost energy along its blade, casting pale blue light across the snow between them. He studied the stranger with the same expressionless thoroughness he brought to every threat assessment, cataloging, measuring, deciding. Who are you? Kratos said. It was not a question in the way most people asked questions. It was a demand delivered at conversational volume, and which somehow made it more threatening than shouting. The stranger's expression shifted into something warm and straightforward. Goku. Son Goku. I kind of ended up here by accident. I was training between dimensions, and the exit went wrong. He paused, glancing at the crater around him. Sorry about the trees. You fell from outside the 9 realms, Atreus said, stepping up beside his father, bow in hand but arrow undrawn. His eyes were moving across Goku with an intensity that went beyond threat assessment. The boy was reading something. That shouldn't be possible without the Bifrost or a horn. Yeah, I don't know what those are, Goku said pleasantly. Kratos' grip on the Leviathan axe adjusted by a fraction. He had heard those words before, or words like them. The particular cheerful ignorance of a being that had no reason to fear what it didn't know because it had never encountered anything capable of making it afraid. He had heard that tone from gods. He had heard it from monsters. He had heard it from the kind of thing that leveled civilizations without malice, simply because it was moving in a direction and civilizations happened to be there. He had never heard it from something that felt, to every sense he possessed, like a mortal man. "You will come with us," Kratos said. Goku tilted his head. I was going to look around a little first." That was not a suggestion. A beat of silence. The Fimbul winter wind moved through the shattered pines, carrying snow that stung like needles. Goku looked at Kratos for a long moment, and something shifted in his expression. Not intimidation, but genuine attention. The look of a fighter who had just recalibrated what he was looking at. His eyes moved to the axe, and to the tattoos, to the way Kratos stood like a man who had been the most dangerous thing in every room he'd ever entered, and had simply grown accustomed to the fact. "You're strong," Goku said. Not a compliment, an observation. The kind made by someone taking inventory. "Yes," Kratos said. Goku smiled, and it was the smile of a man who had just been handed exactly what he wanted. "Okay," he said. "I'll come." Atreus exhaled beside his father, when Kratos did not need to look at his son to know the boy was doing the same thing Kratos was doing, trying to decide whether the stranger's agreement was reassuring or whether it was the most unsettling thing that had happened yet. It was the most unsettling thing that had happened yet. The walk back to the house took 40 minutes through Fimbul winter terrain that punished inattention. Ice-slicked roots hidden under fresh snow. Ravines that appeared without warning at the edges of ridgelines. The cold that had settled over Midgard during these 3 years was not the clean cold of a natural winter. It had a weight to it, a pressure, as though the temperature itself was being enforced by something with intent. Kratos moved through it with the mechanical efficiency of a man who had long since stopped negotiating with discomfort. Atreus moved through it with the adaptive quickness of a boy who had grown up treating survival as a baseline rather than an achievement. Goku moved through it like he was on a pleasant afternoon walk, hands behind his head, looking at everything with the focused curiosity of someone trying to memorize a place they intend to understand. He asked questions constantly, not nervous questions, not the careful probing of someone trying to extract intelligence. Genuine questions, asked with the directness of a person who had never learned that curiosity could be a vulnerability. What were the ravens? Why was the winter wrong? What was the large structure visible on the distant mountain? Who built the boat he had seen frozen at the lake's edge? Kratos answered none of them. Atreus answered approximately half, unable to fully suppress the part of him that responded to genuine interest with genuine engagement, before catching his father's expression and going quiet again. What Kratos was doing beneath the silence was considerably more complex than simply ignoring a stranger's questions. He was measuring. Every fighter had a signature, a particular quality of presence that told you things their words never would. Kratos had spent centuries learning to read those signatures with the same precision other men applied to tracking animals through snow. The way a being held its weight. The micro-adjustments of balance that revealed how much of their attention was genuinely relaxed versus performed. The quality of their awareness, whether they were scanning for threats or simply observing, and whether they could tell the difference between the two. Thus, Goku's signature was the most confusing thing Kratos had encountered since arriving in the Norse lands. The energy he carried, that warm, self-contained vastness, was completely stable. Not suppressed, not contained through effort, simply resting at a natural equilibrium the way a mountain rests. There was no performance in it. Whatever Goku was, he wasn't pretending to be less dangerous than he was, which paradoxically made him seem less dangerous than he was, or because beings that were genuinely that powerful almost never needed to perform anything. But underneath the equilibrium, Kratos could feel the potential the way you feel a held breath. Not tense, not coiled, just present, available, enormous. They reached the house as the gray Fimbul winter light was beginning its early retreat toward darkness. It started, as most things involving Goku appeared to start, with something completely reasonable. Kratos had gestured toward the exterior training area beside the house, a flat space of packed earth and stone that he used for maintaining Atreus' combat conditioning. He had intended it as a place to continue the conversation away from the interior, away from anything Goku could observe and later report to Odin's network. Goku had stepped into the space, looked around approvingly, and then looked at Kratos with an expression that was entirely transparent in its intentions. "Could we spar?" he asked. "I want to understand how strong you are." "No," Kratos said. "Just to get a sense of it. I won't use my full power." Atreus made a small sound that might have been a suppressed laugh. Kratos looked at his son. Atreus arranged his face into an expression of complete neutrality. "No," Kratos said again. What happened next was not technically a violation of that refusal. Goku simply moved, a casual, exploratory movement. The kind of lateral step a fighter makes when they're feeling out the dimensions of a space. Except the step covered 15 feet in a fraction of a second, and the displacement of air it created hit Kratos like a shockwave. And the Spartan rage that lived permanently in the basement of Kratos' chest treated the sudden air pressure like an attack and responded accordingly. The Leviathan axe came up. Goku's hand came up to meet it. The contact between axe blade and open palm produced a shockwave that blew the snow off every surface within 40 feet, cracked the packed earth of the training area in a spiderweb pattern, and knocked Atreus backward 3 steps, despite the boy having planted himself with full anticipation of something happening. Both of them went still. Kratos looked at his axe. The blade had connected with Goku's palm with the full force of a throw-return cycle, the frost enchantment active. It was the kind of blow that had caved in troll skulls and staggered dark elves. Goku's hand was unmarked. There was frost crystallizing on his palm, and he was looking at it with genuine interest rather than pain. "Cold," Goku observed. "That's a good enchantment. I can feel it trying to work." Kratos pulled the axe back. "What are you?" "I told you. Son Goku. I'm a Saiyan. It's a warrior race. We're not from your world." He closed his hand. Water in the frost cracked and fell from his palm in small glittering pieces. "That actually stung a little. You're really strong." The compliment was entirely sincere. That was somehow the most alarming part. Kratos attacked. Not the measured, controlled engagement of a man testing something unknown. The full, committed assault of a Spartan general who had decided that the only way to accurately measure a threat was to apply maximum force and observe the result. The Leviathan axe came in 3 consecutive combinations. Axe work that had been refined across 2 pantheons worth of combat. Each strike flowing from the last with the mechanical perfection of a weapon that had been built specifically to kill divine beings. Between strikes, he drove his elbow into what should have been a vulnerable position, used his knee to attempt a sweep, and finished the combination with a recall throw at point-blank range. Goku moved through all of it. Not blocked, moved. The footwork was extraordinary, minimal and precise, each repositioning placing him exactly where the next strike wasn't. With a half-inch of margin that felt less like luck and more like the kind of spatial awareness that came from fighting things significantly faster than Kratos for a very long time. The elbow met empty air. The sweep found no planted foot to catch. The recall throw grazed his shoulder, and he rolled with it rather than against it. Coming up 10 feet away, with his hair slightly displaced and his expression genuinely delighted. "Okay," Goku said, dropping into a fighting stance that Kratos didn't recognize from any tradition in the Norse lands. Loose and centered, weight distributed with an ease that suggested he could move in any direction at identical speed. "Your technique is incredible. I've never seen anything like it." Kratos looked at the cracked earth between them. He looked at the frost still dissipating from the air where the axe had passed. He recalibrated, with the cold efficiency of a man who had survived by accurately assessing what could kill him. This being could not be killed by the Leviathan axe, not in its current state, possibly not in any state. That assessment did not frighten Kratos. It never did. It simply rearranged the architecture of the problem. "You held back," Kratos said. "A little," Goku admitted. I didn't want to wreck your house." He glanced at the cracked training area. More than this. From the doorway of the house, Atreus was watching with an expression that had moved well past suppressed amusement into something more complicated. The boy had his hand pressed flat against the door frame, and his eyes were moving between his father and the stranger with the particular look he got when the pieces of something were assembling themselves into a shape he wasn't sure he wanted to see completed. "He doesn't have a soul like a god," Atreus said quietly, mostly to himself. "He doesn't have a soul like a giant either." He paused. "He has a soul like a force of nature that decided to be a person." Goku looked over at him, surprised. "That's actually kind of accurate." Kratos looked at his son. Then he looked at Goku. Then he looked at the cracked earth and the dissipating frost and the unchanged, unmarked palm that had caught the Leviathan axe at full force. "Inside," he said. "Both of you." The Fimbul winter wind moved through the shattered training area, picking up frost crystals and carrying them in slow spirals toward the tree line. Somewhere very far to the northwest, you're in a hall where ravens returned with their reports and a one-eyed god sat with the patience of a spider at the center of a vast and carefully maintained web. Something new had just entered the equation. And Odin, who had not been surprised by anything in 900 years, leaned forward slightly in his seat. Odin's hall at night was a particular kind of beautiful that had nothing to do with warmth. Valaskjalf sat at the crown of Asgard like a declaration, its mead hall proportions scaled to remind every visitor that they were small, and the Allfather was not. The rafters were hung with the pelts of things that no longer existed, creatures from ages before the current pantheon had consolidated its power, trophies not of strength but of elimination. The long tables were empty at this hour. The fires burned low, casting everything in amber and shadow, the kind of light that made faces look like masks and intentions look like architecture. Odin sat at the far end of the hall and listened to his ravens. He had the gift of receiving their reports not as sounds, but as complete sensory packages. Everything Hugin and Munin had observed delivered directly into his cognition with perfect fidelity. He sat with his one eye closed, through the empty socket of the other a dark hollow above his beard, and he processed what they had seen with the methodical thoroughness of a being who had spent millennia turning information into leverage. A figure in orange, crater impact, energy signature unlike anything in the Nine Realms, the frost from the Leviathan axe crystallizing on an unmarked palm. Kratos' full assault meeting empty air. When he opened his eye, he was smiling. It was not a pleasant smile, and it was the smile of a man who had been working on a problem for a very long time and had just discovered an unexpected variable that, properly managed, might solve everything. He sent for Thor before the ravens had fully settled. Inside Kratos' house, the fire was doing its best against the Fimbul winter cold, and Goku was sitting cross-legged on the floor with the comfortable adaptability of someone for whom floors had always been an acceptable seating arrangement. He had declined the chair Atreus offered with genuine gratitude, and no apparent understanding of why declining it might seem unusual. He was eating. Atreus had produced dried meat and hard bread from the stores, and Goku was consuming both with the focused appreciation of someone whose caloric requirements were genuinely extraordinary. Kratos stood near the fire and watched him the way he watched everything, with the complete and still attention of a predator that had learned patience as a survival mechanism. "You said you are from outside the 9 realms," Kratos said. "Outside your whole universe, I think," Goku said, around a mouthful of dried boar. "My world has its own set of, it's hard to explain, different rules, different kind of energy." He swallowed. "Your energy here is interesting. It runs through everything in channels. Back home, it lives in living things, and we pull it out and use it. Here, it's more like rivers, and some of the rivers are really big." "Gods," Atreus said. "Is that what they are?" Goku seemed to be genuinely filing this away. "The 2 birds that showed up after I landed, they connected to one of the big rivers, something cold, old." He looked at Kratos. "That's a problem for you, isn't it?" It was not a question. Goku's combat intelligence, Kratos was discovering, operated several registers above his apparent social awareness. He read tactical situations with the same effortless precision with which he'd read the geometry of the sparring exchange. The underlying structure of threats assembled clearly in his mind, even when the surrounding context was unfamiliar. "Everything in this world is a problem," Kratos said. "The Allfather knows about him now," Atreus said to his father. The boy had seated himself at the table, his expression carrying the particular weight of someone doing rapid strategic calculation. Hugin and Munin were there within minutes of the landing. Whatever Goku is, whatever his energy signature looks like to Odin's sight, he paused. He's going to want it. "Want what?" Goku asked. "You," Atreus said simply. "Odin collects things, power, knowledge, people, especially things from outside what he already controls. He's been preparing for Ragnarok for centuries, and he is..." The boy chose his next word with care. "Thorough." Goku absorbed this with the focused attention he brought to tactical briefings. "What's Ragnarok?" The silence that followed had texture. Kratos moved to the table and sat, which for him was a significant concession to the conversational nature of the situation. He looked at Goku for a long moment, measuring something that wasn't physical this time, and then began to explain with the economy of a man for whom words were tools rather than entertainment. The 9 realms, the world tree, the cycle of destruction and renewal that the Norse cosmos had built its entire theological architecture around. Fimbulwinter as the preamble, the gods that would fall, the ones that would survive to build what came after. Goku listened without interrupting, which Kratos suspected was not his natural default, but represented genuine effort. "And Odin is trying to stop it," Goku said when Kratos finished. "Odin is trying to control it," Atreus corrected. "There's a difference. Stopping it would mean accepting that some things are larger than him. Odin doesn't accept that." "Huh." Goku turned this over. "Back home we had someone like that. Called himself a god of destruction. Turned out he was just following a schedule set by something even bigger." He paused thoughtfully. "Actually, we had a few people like that." Despite himself, something shifted fractionally in Kratos' expression. The message arrived an hour later. It came through channels that Odin used when he wanted the recipient to understand that refusal was possible, but inadvisable. Not a raven this time, but a pulse of energy through the realm's connective tissue, the Asgardian equivalent of a formal summons, felt by anyone with sufficient divine sensitivity as a pressure at the base of the skull. Kratos felt it. Atreus felt it. Goku tilted his head and looked at the ceiling with the expression of a man hearing a frequency that hadn't been aimed at him, but was loud enough to detect anyway. "That's the same cold thing from the birds," he said. "It's asking for something." "It's summoning you," Atreus said. "Both of you, probably, but mostly you." "What happens if you ignore it?" Goku asked. "Thor comes instead," Kratos said. Goku's expression did something complicated, not fear. The concept appeared genuinely foreign to his face. More like the particular alertness of a fighter who had just been told that the opponent warming up across the arena was someone worth paying full attention to. "How strong is Thor?" "Strong enough," Kratos said, which from him constituted an extraordinary statement. "So Odin wants to meet me." Goku stood, stretching with the unself-conscious ease of a man whose body was simply a very good tool he maintained well. What does he want?" "What he always wants," Kratos said. And his voice carried something that wasn't quite bitterness and wasn't quite warning, but lived in the neighborhood of both. "To make you useful." Goku looked at him steadily. In the firelight, his eyes carried a quality that Kratos found unexpectedly difficult to categorize. Not naivety, not recklessness, but a kind of absolute groundedness, and the look of someone who had been tested enough times against enough things that they had arrived at a clear and unshakable understanding of exactly who they were. "I've met people who wanted to make me useful before," Goku said. "It usually doesn't work out for them." "These ones are different," Kratos said. "Different how?" Kratos was quiet for a moment. The fire shifted. Outside, the Fimbulwinter wind moved through the wildwoods with its particular enforced quality, the cold that felt like policy. "They don't try to make you serve them," he said finally. "They make you believe you chose to." Goku's expression shifted. Something behind his eyes reassessed, recalibrated, filed the warning in a place he would actually be able to access it later. He looked at Atreus, who gave him a small, serious nod of confirmation. Then he looked back at Kratos, and for just a moment the cheerful baseline dropped away, and what looked out from his face was something considerably older than his appearance suggested. Something that had stood at the end of the world more than once and made decisions that couldn't be unmade. "I appreciate the warning," he said. "It was not a warning," Kratos said. "It was a fact. What you do with it is your business." He picked up the Leviathan axe from the table and moved toward the door, and his voice carried back over his shoulder with the flat finality of a man closing a topic rather than inviting discussion. "We leave for Asgard at first light." The journey to the Bifrost Gateway took 2 days through terrain that Fimbulwinter had been quietly dismantling since it began. Kratos set the pace, which was the pace of a man who had decided that efficiency and endurance were the same thing, and maintained it without variation across frozen riverbeds, ice-sheeted rock faces, and forest paths that the accumulated snowfall had reduced to suggestions rather than routes. Atreus moved beside, and sometimes ahead of his father, reading the landscape with the hunter's fluency of someone who had grown up treating the wildwoods as both home and classroom. Between them, slightly to the right and consistently 3 steps behind, in a positioning that was either unconscious or extremely calculated, Goku walked and observed and occasionally asked questions that revealed the specific quality of his intelligence. Not broad curiosity this time, but targeted inquiry. The questions of a fighter building a tactical picture. Well, what did realm travel feel like from inside it? How much of Asgard was Odin's direct territory versus areas other beings controlled? Were there places in the 9 realms where the energy channels ran stronger or weaker? Could a person with no connection to Yggdrasil access realm energy directly? Or did it require some form of existing attunement? Atreus answered most of them. Kratos answered one, when the question was specific enough to demand it. What Goku was doing, beneath the questions, was something Kratos recognized because he had done it himself in the approach to every significant engagement of his life. He was mapping the battlefield before he arrived at it. He was building a model of the Nine Realms power architecture the way a general builds a model of enemy fortifications, not to admire it, but to identify where the walls were thinnest. On the first night, they camped in a stone shelter carved into a hillside that Kratos maintained as a waypoint, unstocked with minimal supplies and positioned for maximum defensibility. The fire was small enough to avoid detection from the air. Atreus slept with the deep, immediate unconsciousness of a young man who had learned to take rest when it was available. Kratos did not sleep, occupying the position near the entrance that was simultaneously sentry duty and personal preference. Goku sat in meditation, and this surprised Kratos enough that he observed it for several minutes before returning his attention to the entrance. The stranger sat perfectly still in the center of the shelter, cross-legged, eyes closed, breathing in a pattern so slow and controlled it was barely perceptible. His energy, that vast, warm, self-contained quality, had shifted during the meditation, not diminishing but deepening, pulling slightly inward the way a tide pulls before the wave builds. It was the most disciplined thing Kratos had seen him do, and it recalibrated something in his ongoing assessment. Goku was not simply a being of raw power who had never needed refinement. He was a being of raw power who had spent a lifetime refining it, and then kept going past the point where most beings would have stopped. On the second day, Goku went quiet. Not the silence of someone who had run out of questions. The silence of someone whose attention had been captured by something internal. Kratos noticed it at mid-morning and filed it without comment. Atreus noticed it an hour later and made the mistake of asking. "Your energy is doing something different," Atreus said. "Since we got closer to, is it the lake? The Lake of Nine?" Goku glanced at him, and there was something careful in the look. "You're perceptive. What's happening?" Goku was quiet for a moment, choosing accuracy over reassurance. "The energy channels you have here, the big ones that run through everything, they're interacting with my ki. Back home, when I'm in a new environment, it usually just takes a few hours to adjust. Here it's taking longer." He flexed his right hand, and Kratos observed the subtle wrongness of it. A barely perceptible hesitation in the motion, as though the signal between intention and action was traveling a slightly longer route than usual. It's like the realm energy is trying to figure out what I am. It keeps probing, testing. "Can it affect your power?" Kratos asked, without turning from the path. "Slow it down a little, not stop it." Goku's voice was entirely matter-of-fact. "My ki is mine. It comes from inside me, not from this world. But using it here is like, you know when you're used to fighting on flat ground and someone puts you on a ship? You can still fight. You just have to keep compensating for the movement." Kratos absorbed this. "How long until the compensation becomes automatic?" "Getting there," Goku said. "Faster than I expected, actually. Your realm energy is interesting. It has a kind of structure, logic. Back home, there's a type of power called God Ki that exists outside normal energy rules. The realm energy here responds to it differently than to my regular Kai. It's like it recognizes the category, even if it doesn't recognize me specifically." Atreus had stopped walking. His father noticed and stopped too, turning. The boy was standing at the crest of a ridge, looking down at the Lake of Nine below them. and his expression had the quality it got when separate pieces of information had just assembled themselves into a shape he hadn't wanted to see completed. "If Odin's seers can detect that," Atreus said slowly. The god Kai response, like if they can see that the realm energy is treating him like a divine entity. He turned to look at Goku. "Odin won't want to use you as a weapon. He'll want to study you. Take apart how you work. Understand what kind of god you are and whether he can replicate it." The Lake of Nine spread below them, its surface frozen in the deep, unnatural ice of Fimbulwinter. The world serpent somewhere beneath it, in a stillness that wasn't sleep so much as compressed patience. The realm gate on the central island rose against the gray sky, its mechanisms dormant, but its connection to Yggdrasil's architecture humming with the particular frequency that Kratos had learned to feel like pressure behind his eyes. "He can't replicate it," Goku said. "He'll try anyway," Atreus said. "That's what Odin does. He tried to replicate giant magic and it cost him his eye. He tried to replicate the power of the Norns and it cost him decades. Oh, he doesn't stop because something costs him. He stops when there's nothing left to take." Goku looked at the frozen lake, at the realm gate, at the gray sky that pressed down over Midgard with the weight of a winter that was not a season, but a symptom. Something shifted in the quality of his silence. The meditation depth from the previous night was back, but active rather than still. A processing quality, the look of someone running calculations that didn't involve numbers. "The ravens reported back within minutes of me landing," he said. "Yes," Kratos said. "So Odin has had 2 days to prepare for my arrival." "Yes. And he's the kind of being who uses that kind of time well." "There is no one better at it," Kratos said. And the flatness in his voice was the particular flatness of someone paying an enemy a tribute they resented but couldn't honestly withhold. Goku nodded slowly. Then he did something neither Kratos nor Atreus expected. He sat down on the ridge, the cross-legged right there on the frozen ground above the Lake of Nine, and closed his eyes. "Then I need 20 minutes, he said, "before we go any further." Kratos looked at him. "We are expected." "I know." Goku's voice had dropped into the register he used during meditation, calm and centered and completely immovable. "If Odin has been preparing for 2 days, I need to stop compensating for the realm energy and start working with it. I need to understand how my KI interacts with his world before I walk into a room with someone who's had 2 days to figure out how to use that interaction against me." He opened one eye and looked up at Kratos with an expression that was entirely serious and entirely without apology. "You told me he makes people believe they chose to serve him. I'm not going to let that happen. But I can't prevent it if I'm fighting the ground I'm standing on at the same time." The open eye closed again. Kratos stood on the ridge above the frozen lake and looked at the stranger sitting in meditation on the ice-crusted ground. And something moved through his assessment that wasn't quite respect and wasn't quite recognition, but shared territory with both. He had known fighters who were powerful. He had known fighters who were intelligent. He had known fighters who were disciplined. He had met very few who were all three, and fewer still who wore it this lightly. He moved to a flat stone at the ridge's edge and sat, the Leviathan axe across his knees, and watched the lake below while the stranger worked. Atreus sat beside his father and said nothing, which was how Kratos knew the boy understood. 20 minutes later, Goku stood up. He rolled his shoulders once. The quality of his energy had changed, not larger, not more aggressive, but settled. The compensation Kratos had observed in his hand movement entirely gone. And his Kai sitting within the realm's energy architecture the way a river stone sits within a current. Not fighting it, not swept by it, simply present within it, on its own terms. "Okay," Goku said. They descended toward the lake, Asgard announced itself the way all genuinely powerful things did. Not with spectacle, but with pressure. The Bifrost carried them through the between space of realm travel in a corridor of light and sound that Kratos endured with the expression of a man tolerating an unpleasant but necessary process. And Atreus navigated with the practiced ease of someone who had made the crossing enough times to stop finding it remarkable. Goku experienced it with his eyes open and his senses fully extended, absorbing every detail of the transition with the focused attention of a scientist who had stumbled into a laboratory he hadn't known existed. The realm energy during transit was extraordinary, concentrated and directional, moving through the Bifrost channel with a coherence that made the ambient currents of Midgard feel diffuse by comparison. Goku could feel the architecture of Yggdrasil through it, not metaphorically, but literally. The world tree's connective structure conducting the transfer the way a nervous system conducts sensation. 9 distinct energy signatures, each with its own character, its own frequency, its own particular flavor of ancient and enormous. He cataloged them in the seconds of transit, with the rapid, comprehensive perception of ultra instinct, operating in passive mode, building a map of the Norse cosmos from the inside out. Then Asgard opened around them, and the pressure became a presence, yet it wasn't the physical scale of it, though the scale was extraordinary. A realm built to the proportions of beings who considered themselves the correct size for the universe. Architecture that made Goku think of the Grand Kai's planet, but older, heavier, saturated with the accumulated weight of millennia of divine occupation. It wasn't the golden light that fell differently here than it did on Midgard, cleaner and more deliberate, as though even the illumination was curated. It was the energy. The realm energy of Asgard ran at a frequency that was higher and more aggressive than anywhere else in the 9 realms, a constant background hum that pressed against foreign power signatures with the territorial insistence of a place that knew what belonged in it and what did not. Goku's ki responded immediately, and for 3 full seconds that it was the most complex energetic negotiation he had attempted since first accessing Ultra Instinct. The realm pushed. His ki held its ground. The realm assessed, recalibrated, pushed from a different angle. His ki identified the pattern and stopped resisting it, letting the pressure flow around rather than against. And the negotiation resolved into a kind of armed neutrality. Asgard's energy acknowledging his presence without accepting it. His ki existing within the realm's architecture without drawing from it. It took 3 seconds. It felt like considerably more. Beside him, Kratos had watched the 3 seconds with a sharp, when a cataloging attention he brought to everything, and said nothing, which Goku was learning to recognize as his version of acknowledgement. The escort met them at the realm gate. 6 Einherjar in full Asgardian warplate, carrying spears that hummed with runic enchantment, their faces carrying the particular blankness of soldiers who had been briefed on their assignment and had decided the briefing was above their pay grade to question. They formed around the 3 travelers with professional efficiency, and their eyes moved to Goku with the specific quality of men who had been told something was dangerous and were attempting to take that information seriously while also not entirely believing it, because the dangerous thing was a man of average height in an orange tunic. Goku smiled at the nearest one. The soldier looked straight ahead. The path through Asgard to Valaskjalf took them through districts that Goku absorbed in passing. The training grounds where Einherjar ran drills that were technically proficient and spiritually hollow. The residences that were grand and cold and somehow deeply unoccupied feeling despite the evident population. The spaces between structures where the wind moved with a directional quality that suggested it was being managed rather than simply occurring. Everything in Asgard had the quality of a performance being given by very capable performers who had forgotten or never known what the performance was supposed to communicate. He thought of Capsule Corporation, of the Lookout, of King Kai's small planet. Places that were what they were without apology. He thought of the hyperbolic time chamber, which had been strange and alienating, but had never felt curated. He thought, something is wrong here in a way that has nothing to do with the Fimbulwinter. Valaskialf's great doors opened before they reached them. Odin was already standing. This was, Goku would later understand, a deliberate choice. The Allfather received supplicants seated, petitioners with minimal acknowledgement, enemies with armed escort and explicit threat. Standing at the far end of his own hall, alone, firelight behind him, Mas was a form of greeting that communicated precisely calibrated things. That this visitor was significant, that the Allfather had decided to invest the theater of respect, that the meeting was already being framed as a conversation between equals before a single word had been spoken. Goku walked the length of the hall and felt Odin's gaze the entire way. It was not the gaze of a fighter taking measure, though there was that element. No, it was the gaze of a scholar who had already completed his initial research and was now verifying conclusions. The single eye moved across Goku with an efficiency that suggested it was seeing considerably more than surface information. The realm energy's response to his Kai, the specific signature of God Ki against Asgardian architecture, the 3-second negotiation at the gate that Odin's seers had certainly reported in detail, and everything about the gaze said, I have been thinking about you for 2 days, and I already know more about what you are than you know about where you are. It was, Goku recognized with a part of his mind that processed threats rather than social situations. An opening move. Son Goku, Odin said. His voice had the quality of a sound that had been used to fill large spaces for a very long time. Warm without being welcoming, assured without being aggressive. I have been looking forward to this. I've been hearing that, Goku said. Something moved in Odin's eye that might have been amusement. You've been talking to Kratos. He glanced at the Spartan with the ease of a man acknowledging furniture he had arranged himself. He has a poet's gift for making everything sound like a threat. He told me facts, Goku said. What I did with them was my business. The amusement in Odin's eye settled into something more attentive. He had expected, Goku sensed, a more socially navigable version of the response, less direct, more amenable to the frame he had constructed. He adjusted without showing the adjustment, which was itself a form of extraordinary skill. Then let me offer you facts in return, Odin said, moving to the long table and gesturing toward it with the ease of a host who had decided hospitality was the correct instrument for this particular moment. Sit, eat. Let me tell you what I know about where you are and what it means that you're here. Behind Goku, Kratos had stopped moving. The quality of his stillness had changed from escort to something else, a held position, the stillness of a man watching a negotiation he had seen go badly before, and was calculating the earliest moment at which he would need to intervene. Atreus had gone to stand slightly to his father's left, and his eyes were moving between Odin and Goku, with the rapid assessment of someone reading a conversation that was happening on 2 levels simultaneously. Goku looked at the table, at the food, at the firelight and the trophies in the rafters, and the careful architecture of welcome that Odin had constructed in this space. He thought about what Kratos had said. Not a warning, a fact. He sat down, not because the frame had worked, but because the fastest way to understand what someone was trying to make you believe was to let them try. He folded his hands on the table, met Odin's single eye with the direct, uncomplicated attention that was simply his natural mode of engagement, and waited. Odin sat across from him, and for just a fraction of a second, before the Allfather arranged his expression into the one he had decided to wear for this conversation, and something moved across his face that was not calculation or performance or the confident ease of a being who had been the smartest entity in every room for 9 centuries. It was the specific, quickly suppressed expression of a man who had just realized that the variable he had spent 2 days preparing to manage was looking at him with the patient, interested eyes of someone who had decided to let him talk and was already thinking 3 steps ahead. Odin talked for 2 hours. This was itself a form of extraordinary commitment. The Allfather was not a being who spent 2 hours on anything without extracting precise and calculated value from every minute of it. And the shape of what he offered Goku across that firelit table was constructed with the care of something that had been assembled over the 2 days since the ravens returned. It was not a lie exactly. The most effective manipulations never were. It was a careful selection of truths, arranged in an order and proportion designed to produce a specific emotional and logical destination in the listener. He told Goku about Ragnarök, not Kratos' version, spare and factual, but Odin's version, vast and textured and painted with the genuine grief of a being who had spent centuries watching a prophecy he couldn't alter, consume everything he had built. He spoke of his sons with a father's cadence, of Asgard with the voice of a man describing something he loved, of the Jotnar with the measured fairness of someone demonstrating their own objectivity. He acknowledged his failures with the precise, controlled candor of a being who had learned that strategic confession was more disarming than denial. Goku listened to all of it. He ate steadily through the meal that servants brought without being summoned. Food that was genuinely excellent and almost certainly also a message. Abundance, hospitality, the material expression of what Asgard could offer. He listened with the focused attention he brought to tactical briefings, and he asked questions when questions served clarity rather than conversation. And he said very little that Odin could use. What he was doing, beneath the listening, was feeling. Not emotionally, though emotion was present. A low background hum of something that wasn't quite distrust and wasn't quite sympathy, but lived between them. He was feeling the realm energy, the way it moved through Valaskjalf, the way it responded to Odin's presence specifically. The Allfather's connection to Asgard's power architecture was unlike anything Goku had encountered. Not the direct, personal relationship of a fighter with their own ki, but something woven through the environment itself. Odin's awareness distributed through the realm the way water distributes through soil. He was everywhere in this hall. Every torch, every current of air, every stone in the floor was a nerve ending. Nothing said in Valaskjalf was private. Nothing thought too loudly was safe. Goku ate his food and listened to the most sophisticated manipulation he had ever been subjected to, and kept his face pleasantly attentive and filed everything away. When Odin finally arrived at the offer, it came packaged in the language of mutual benefit, which was the only language in which Odin made offers. "You cannot return home through conventional means," he said, and the ravens had told him this. The absence of any dimensional gateway signature in Goku's arrival, the one-way quality of the rift that had deposited him here. The kind of tear that brought you here doesn't leave a thread to follow back. You would need something capable of creating a new passage between your universe and this one. He paused, letting the shape of the problem sit between them with the weight of something real. "I have been studying the space between realms for 900 years. I have resources, knowledge, and tools that exist nowhere else in the 9 realms. If anyone can reconstruct the pathway home, it is me." He let that settle. "In return," he continued, with the ease of a man making a request so reasonable, it barely warranted the word request, "I ask only for your cooperation during the time it takes to solve the problem. Your presence here, Maus, your energy. It represents a form of knowledge I have spent centuries seeking. Allow my scholars to study how your power interacts with realm architecture. Stand beside Asgard as an ally during the coming conflict. Nothing that compromises your values. Nothing that asks you to be other than what you are. Silence. The fire shifted. Somewhere in the rafters, a trophy pelt moved in a draft that hadn't existed a moment before. That's a generous offer, Goku said. I am a generous being, Odin said, when generosity serves everyone's interests. How long would it take to find the way home? Months, perhaps a year. Odin's voice was entirely steady, possibly longer. The variables are significant. Goku nodded slowly. Then he looked down at his hands, flat on the table, and something in his expression shifted. The pleasant attentiveness dropping away briefly, replaced by the quality Kratos had seen in the training area crater, and that particular look of absolute clarity about exactly who he was. Can I think about it? He said. Odin smiled. Of course. You'll stay in Asgard tonight. Rest. Tomorrow we can... I'd like to go back to Midgard tonight, Goku said. A beat, barely perceptible. Odin's single eye held its expression with the practiced skill of 1,000 years of diplomatic performance. And the beat passed, and the smile remained, and none of that made the beat disappear. Naturally, Odin said, I'll have the Bifrost prepared. They were 300 feet from the realm gate when Thor found them. He came from above, the way he always came when he wanted to make a point about the approach. Mjolnir's return arc carrying him down from the Asgardian sky in a trajectory that landed him directly in their path, with the impact of something that had decided the ground would accommodate it and been correct. The crater his landing made was not as large as Goku's arrival crater on Midgard, but it was made with considerably more intent. Thor straightened and looked at Goku with red-rimmed eyes that carried the specific quality of a man who drank to quiet something that wouldn't stay quiet. And behind the drink and behind the noise was a fighter's intelligence that had been underestimated by better beings than currently stood in his path. He was enormous. Not Asgardian architectural enormous, personally enormous, the kind of size that had been built by centuries of combat rather than divine fiat. Layered and dense and carrying the weathered quality of something that had been tested and had not broken. The lightning that lived in him was visible at his skin's surface, blue-white threads tracing the lines of old scars. And his eyes moved across Goku with the rapid, comprehensive assessment of a warrior who had been briefed and was now performing his own verification. So, Thor said. His voice had the resonance of distant thunder, deep and inevitable. The thing that fell from outside the realms. Son Goku, Goku said. You're Thor. I am. Thor's eyes moved to Kratos, with a quality that was old and complicated, and not yet at the boiling point that it would eventually reach. Then back to Goku. Father says I'm not to damage you. That's considerate, Goku said. I haven't decided to listen. Thor rolled his neck once, the sound of it lost in a crack of ambient lightning. My father collects things, studies them, takes them apart to see how they work. His eyes were direct and unexpectedly honest. I want to know what you actually are before he decides what to do with you. There's one way I know to find that out. Kratos moved, not toward Thor, he knew better than to read this as a simple threat, but into a position that placed him where he could respond to any of three outcomes, which was as close to neutral as Kratos ever got in proximity to the god of thunder. Atreus's hand was on his bow, not drawn, present. Goku looked at Thor for a long moment. The lightning at the god's skin surface was intensifying, the charge building with the slow, massive accumulation of a storm deciding to commit. Mjolnir hummed in his grip, with a frequency that Goku could feel in his back teeth, a sound that occupied the register just below conscious hearing and pushed upward into the body as pure vibration. This was, he understood immediately, genuine. Not performance, not theater, not the kind of challenge issued by someone who expected to be talked out of it. Thor wanted to fight and would fight, and the only relevant question was whether Goku was going to engage on those terms or attempt to navigate around them. He thought about Odin's hall, the curated warmth, the careful truths arranged in careful order, the offer wrapped in the language of mutual benefit. He thought about Thor, standing in the open air outside his father's walls, and asking with complete directness for the one thing Odin had spent 2 hours approaching sideways. He dropped into his fighting stance. "Okay," he said, "but not here. Somewhere we won't wreck anything important." Thor smiled for the first time, and it transformed his face entirely, burning away the drink, quiet, and the weight, and the complicated history, and leaving something much simpler and much older underneath. The pure, uncomplicated joy of a warrior who had just been told yes. I know a place," he said. The place Thor knew was Muspelheim's outer boundary. Not the realm itself. The threshold, a shelf of black volcanic rock that jutted from the dimensional edge where Muspelheim's fire architecture bled into the space between realms. Close enough to feel the heat rolling off the realm's surface in waves that made the air ripple and distort. Far enough that the fire giants within weren't an immediate concern. The sky here was the color of a forge at full temperature, deep orange fading to black at the zenith. And the rock under their feet had been fused smooth by millennia of proximity to something that burned at temperatures that made the concept of burning feel inadequate. Thor had brought them through a Bifrost shard, a fragment of realm-bridging technology that Asgardian warriors carried for emergency extraction. And the four of them stood on that volcanic shelf, with the heat pressing against them from one direction and the cold between realm air pressing from the other. And the collision of those two atmospheres created a constant low roar that was the closest thing to privacy available in the 9 realms. Odin's distributed awareness, woven through Asgard's stones and air, did not extend here. Kratos stood at the shelf's edge and watched. Atreus stood beside his father and did the same. Neither of them had objected to the location, which told Goku something about how they read Thor in unguarded moments versus Thor in his father's orbit. Thor set Mjolnir down on the volcanic rock with a deliberateness that was the opposite of casual. The hammer sat there and hummed, and the rock around it developed a network of fine cracks from the contained weight. Yas and Thor turned to face Goku with his arms loose at his sides, and his eyes carrying the focused clarity of a man who had set down everything he used to obscure himself along with the weapon. "No Mjolnir," Thor said. "Not yet. I want to see what you are without it first." "I'll match you," Goku said. "No transformations. Base form." Thor looked at him steadily. "You have transformations. Several. And in base form, you caught the Leviathan axe with your hand." "It stung," Goku said honestly. Something moved through Thor's expression that was not quite amusement and not quite respect, but was assembled from components of both. He raised his fists, and the lightning that had been threading his skin's surface pulled inward, concentrating, and the air around him became the specific kind of charge that made hair rise and skin prickle. And the deep animal part of the brain sent urgent recommendations about being somewhere else. Then he moved. Thor's speed was not Goku's speed. This was a truth that established itself in the first exchange with the clean finality of a mathematical proof. Goku was faster, meaningfully faster, the kind of speed differential that, in a pure racing context, would have been embarrassing. But Thor was not fighting a racing contest. He was fighting the way he had fought for centuries, which was with the absolute physical commitment of a being who had learned that if he hit something hard enough, the speed differential stopped mattering. The first punch caught Goku on the shoulder because Goku let it. He needed the data. He needed to know what Thor's strikes felt like, what they carried beyond the obvious physical force, the divine ichor component, the lightning that transferred on contact, the specific quality of Asgardian godhood expressed through impact. The shoulder hit, landed, and the force of it was extraordinary. Not quite Vegeta at full power, but in a register that demanded genuine respect, and the lightning that traveled with it was something else entirely. It didn't just conduct across his skin. It reached inward, probing, looking for a nervous system to disrupt, and found Goku's ki instead, and the two energies met in a collision that made Goku's entire right side go briefly, brilliantly numb. He moved back 20 feet, shaking sensation back into his arm, and reassessed. "That's different," he said. "Lightning tends to be," Thor said, and came again. And the next three exchanges were Goku calibrating, not to Thor's speed, which he had parsed in the first second, but to the lightning, learning the pattern of how it traveled, where it concentrated on the moment before a strike, how it behaved when deflected versus absorbed. Thor was reading him simultaneously, adjusting his combinations with the experienced intelligence of a fighter who had spent centuries learning to compensate for speed disadvantages through timing and commitment, and the willingness to take hits that would have ended lesser beings in exchange for the hit he was actually trying to land. They were, in their own completely different registers, doing the same thing. It was Atreus who noticed it first. He said nothing, but Kratos caught the shift in the boy's posture. The slight release of readiness that indicated threat assessment dropping from immediate to elevated, and behind it, something that looked almost like wonder. By the fifth exchange, Goku had the lightning mapped. He started moving differently, not the minimal precision footwork of the early exchanges, but something more open, more dynamic, creating angles that forced Thor to overcommit to reach him, and then using the overcommitment as the point of contact, rather than waiting for the strike to arrive. Thor adapted. Goku adapted to the adaptation. The pace accelerated, the volcanic shelf becoming a geometry of impact and displacement, and the heat from Muspelheim's boundary mixed with the ozone of Thor's constant charge until the air itself felt like a third combatant. Thor hit him clean, finally. A right hand that had been 4 exchanges in the making, and landed exactly where it was intended. Center mass, full commitment, every century of combat experience focused into a single point of contact. Goku skidded back 12 feet across the volcanic rock, his boots carving parallel furrows in the fused stone, and stopped himself with one hand dropped to the surface. He looked up. His gi had a scorch mark across the chest from the lightning discharge. His ki had surged automatically to compensate for the impact, not quite the Super Saiyan threshold, but close to it, the power rising like a tide, responding to a moon it hadn't known was there. He breathed once, controlled it, brought it back to baseline. Thor stood across the shelf breathing hard, sweat cutting through the grime of the approach, and his eyes were alive with something that had nothing to do with alcohol or the weight of his father's court or the complicated grief of a man who had done terrible things and was only beginning to understand they were terrible. "You pulled back," Thor said. "Yes." "Why?" "Because if I didn't, this conversation ends, and I need the conversation more than I need to win the fight." Thor stared at him. Then he did something Goku had not seen from him yet. and had not entirely expected. He laughed. Not the performance of a man demonstrating ease, but the real thing. Rough and sudden and startled out of him, the laugh of someone who had been told a truth they hadn't anticipated in the exact moment they needed to hear one. He picked up Mjolnir and walked to the shelf's edge and sat down on it with the ease of a man who had decided the posturing portion of the evening was concluded. After a moment, Goku sat beside him. Below them, the Muspelheim burned with the patient intensity of something that had been burning since before the current pantheon had names. "My father wants to use you," Thor said. It was not a revelation. It was a man stating a fact he had made peace with and was choosing to share anyway. "I know," Goku said. "He'll give you what you want first. Make it real enough that you trust it. Then the cost appears." Thor's voice was level. "It always appears." "What did he give you?" Goku asked. And the question landed differently than questions usually did. Thor was quiet for a long moment, and beside them, Muspelheim burned, and the between-realm cold pressed from the other direction, and the roar of their collision continued its low and constant privacy. "Purpose," Thor said finally. "When I was young enough to need it, given to me." He turned Mjolnir over in his hands, studying it. "By the time I understood the price, I had paid most of it already." Goku looked at the hammer, at the cracks in the volcanic rock around where it had rested, at the scorch mark on his own chest, already fading as his Kai processed the residual lightning charge. "He told me he could get me home," he said. "He might be able to," Thor said. "That's what makes him dangerous. He doesn't lie about the thing he's offering. He lies about everything surrounding it." Behind them, Kratos had moved closer, without appearing to have moved at all. And when he spoke, his voice carried the particular quality it got when he was saying something he had learned at a cost he hadn't finished paying. "There is a third option," Kratos said, "between accepting Odin's offer and refusing it." Both of them turned. Kratos stood against the Muspelheim sky, axe on his back, arms at his sides, and his face held the expression it wore when he was choosing to give something he would rather have kept. "The Norns," he said. "The fates of this world. They sit outside Odin's reach, outside the realm architecture he controls. If anyone can find a path between universes without Odin's hand on it..." He stopped, started again. "It will not be simple. The price they ask is always something real. Everything real costs something real," Goku said. Kratos looked at him for a moment. "Yes," he said. "It does." Atreus was watching his father, with the complicated expression of a son who was learning, again, that the man he had spent years trying to understand was still capable of surprising him. Then he looked at Goku, and his eyes carried the weight of someone who had just watched three separate pieces of a larger picture align. "If we go to the Norns," Atreus said carefully, "Odin will know. He'll know we bypassed him. He'll know Goku chose a different path." "Yes," Kratos said. "That accelerates everything. Odin moves faster when he's been circumvented. Our Ragnarök was always coming," Kratos said. "The question was never whether, only when and who stands where when it arrives." The volcanic shelf held all four of them in its heat and noise, and Muspelheim burned below and somewhere in the upper architecture of the 9 realms. In a hall where ravens roosted and a one-eyed god was already aware that his careful offer had not produced the result his 2 days of preparation had designed it to produce. The calculation was being revised. As Goku stood up, brushed volcanic dust from his gyat, looked at Thor, still seated at the shelf's edge with Mjolnir resting across his knees. "You could come with us," Goku said. Thor looked up at him with the expression of a man being offered something he had stopped letting himself want. "My father isn't here," Goku said simply. The thunder god was quiet for a long time. Below them, Muspelheim burned. In the between-realm cold pressed and the heat pressed back, and their roaring collision continued, steady and indifferent and vast. Thor stood up. The Norns lived at the well. Urdarbrunner sat at the base of Yggdrasil's roots in a space that existed slightly sideways from the normal geometry of the 9 realms. Accessible not through Bifrost travel, but through a kind of intentional surrender. You had to approach the World Tree's base with genuine need and genuine willingness to receive what was given rather than what was wanted. And the path opened or it didn't, are based on criteria that had nothing to do with power or worthiness in any conventional sense. Kratos had been here once before. The memory of it lived in him with the particular quality of things that had changed the architecture of who he was without his permission. They walked the approach in silence, all 4 of them, through a forest that grew older with every step. The trees transitioning from the familiar pines of Midgard through species that had no names in any living language. A wood so ancient it had gone silver, bark patterns that looked less like growth and more like writing in an alphabet that predated alphabets. The realm energy here ran differently than anywhere else in the 9 realms. Not in channels, not in the aggressive territorial frequency of Asgard. It moved in slow, enormous circles, tidal in its rhythm, the energy of things that measured time in epochs rather than years. When Goku's ki responded to it, with the particular attentiveness it reserved for things that existed outside the categories he had built his understanding of power from. This was not the energy of fighters or gods or cosmic entities with agendas. This was the energy of process itself, of the mechanism that kept the wheel turning, indifferent to what the wheel contained. The well appeared between 2 roots that arched overhead like the ribs of something vast and patient, and the Norns were already there. They did not look like what any of them had expected, which Goku suspected was deliberate. 3 women of indeterminate age, their features carrying the quality of faces seen in peripheral vision, clear enough to register, too fluid to fix completely in memory. They sat at the well's edge with the ease of people who had been sitting in the same place since before sitting had been invented, and they looked at the 4 arrivals with eyes that held the specific quality of beings for whom the present moment was simply one thread in a weave they could see entire. The eldest spoke first. Her voice had no particular volume, but filled the space completely, the way water fills a container. "The one from outside," she said, and her eyes were on Goku. "We have been waiting for you. Not long, by our measure, since before your universe learned to make stars." Goku met her gaze. "Can you find the way back to my world?" "We can see it," she said. "Whether it can be walked is a different question." "What's the difference?" "Seeing a path and opening one are different kinds of work. Opening requires something be given in exchange. The world tree does not create new connections without receiving something of equivalent weight." "What kind of weight?" Atreus asked from behind Goku, and his voice was careful in the specific way it got when he was asking a question whose answer he suspected he already knew and didn't want confirmed. The eldest Norn looked at the boy with an expression that was not unkind and not comfortable. "The boy knows already," she said. "He has been reading the shape of things since before he knew what reading meant." Atreus said nothing. The middle Norn spoke, and her voice had a different quality than the eldest's. Younger in some register that had nothing to do with age, more immediate, more concerned with the specific present moment rather than the full sweep of what had been and would be. The passage your arrival tore, it sealed behind you as passages do. Creating a new one requires an anchor on each side. On your side, your own energy can serve. On this side, something of equivalent cosmological weight must be committed. What does that mean? Goku asked. It means the 9 realms must give something it cannot take back, she said. The world tree does not lend. It gives or it does not. Silence at the well. The water in it did not reflect the sky above. It reflected something else. Something that moved with a slow purpose, that bore no relationship to anything currently occurring at its surface. Thor had gone very still. Kratos had gone the particular quality of still that he achieved when all his processing had gone internal, every external resource diverted to the single problem in front of him. Then everything changed. The realm energy surged. Not locally, everywhere, simultaneously. The 9 realms' entire power architecture shifting like a body reacting to a wound, a vast, systemic response to something that had just occurred at sufficient scale to register across every channel of Yggdrasil at once. The well water went dark. The ancient trees around them groaned with a sound that was not wood under stress, but something older. The sound of structure responding to load it had not been designed to bear. Goku was on his feet before the surge finished registering, his ki rising automatically. The threat response that Ultra Instinct had refined past conscious decision into something that simply happened at the speed of necessity. That's Odin, Kratos said. His voice had dropped to the particular register it used when he had already determined what was happening and was now moving to the response phase. What did he do? Atreus's voice was tight. The youngest Norn answered, and her voice had lost its measured quality entirely, raw with something that beings outside time almost never felt. Urgency. He has moved the timeline, she said. He found the accelerant he needed. He is beginning Ragnarok himself, on his terms, at his chosen moment. Her eyes found Goku with an intensity that the other two had not shown. He has decided that if you will not be his weapon, you will be his justification. The anomaly from outside the realms. The foreign power that disrupted the natural order. She paused. He will tell the 9 realms that you caused this. The weight of it settled over the well in the silence that followed. Goku absorbed it with the focused stillness he used for things that required genuine processing rather than immediate action. Then he looked at the 3 Norns with an expression that had shed every remaining layer of the pleasant baseline he wore as a default social mode. How long until it reaches full scale? He asked. Hours, the eldest said. He has been preparing for centuries. The trigger requires only commitment. Can you still open the passage home? The eldest looked at him for a long moment. Yes, but not quickly. The world tree requires time to grow a new connection, and the anchor weight required. She stopped, looked at the well. In the current disturbance, the cost has changed. What does it cost now? Goku asked. Something that cannot be taken back, she said again. And this time, the repetition felt like a different kind of statement. Not evasion, but the specific honesty of someone who was refusing to name a price because naming it would constitute a kind of coercion. And they had decided, in whatever ethical architecture governed beings like themselves, not to coerce. Goku was quiet for a moment. Then he looked at Kratos, at the Spartan's face, which held the expression it always held. Not closed, not open. Simply present. A man who had learned to exist in the moment directly in front of him, because the alternative was being consumed by everything behind and ahead. He looked at Atreus, who had been reading the shape of things since before he knew what reading meant, and whose face held the weight of someone who had just finished reading something he couldn't unread. He looked at Thor, who was standing at the edge of the well's light with the expression of a man who had made too many choices in his father's service, and was only now, at considerable cost, beginning to understand what choices made in his own name felt like. He looked at the passage the Norns had said they could see. He looked at Ragnarök, not literally, but in the sense of feeling its shape through the realm energy, the vast systemic catastrophe that Odin had just chosen to begin, and the destruction that would move through the 9 realms with the indifferent thoroughness of a force that had been waiting for someone to open the gate. He made a decision. "Not yet," he said. "Open it when it's done." The eldest Norn looked at him with the expression of someone whose model of a situation has just been revised. "You would stay." "Someone started this because of me," Goku said. "I'm not leaving while it's still burning." He turned to Kratos, and something passed between them that didn't require words. The particular recognition of 2 beings who had each, in their own universe, made the choice to stand in front of something catastrophic, when standing aside would have been easier and possibly wiser, and ultimately not something either of them could do. "Tell me what Ragnarök looks like from inside it," Goku said. Kratos looked at him for a moment. Then he turned toward the path back out of the Norn space, and toward the realm energy now roiling with Odin's unleashed design, toward everything that was coming through every channel of the world tree simultaneously. "Loud," Kratos said. His grip on the Leviathan axe tightened. They moved. Ragnarök announced itself not with thunder, but with silence. The specific silence of 9 realms holding their breath simultaneously. Every living thing across Yggdrasil's vast connective architecture, pausing in the half-second before the wave arrived. The way a shore goes quiet in the moment between a wave's peak and its breaking. Goku felt it through his ki with perfect clarity. The entire Norse cosmos inhaling at once, and then Odin's design releasing, and the exhale that followed was the sound of the world coming apart on a schedule one being had spent 9 centuries writing. They emerged from the Norn space into Midgard, already changed. The sky had fractured, not metaphorically. The atmospheric boundary between Midgard and the realm above it had developed visible tears, not bifrost light, but something raw, the dimensional equivalent of stress fractures in stone. Moss and through them bled energies from adjacent realms that had no business mixing with Midgard's own. The temperature had dropped another 10 degrees in the time they had been at the well. Fimbul winter accelerating past its already punishing baseline towards something that felt less like weather and more like erasure. The ground moved with a low, continuous tremor, Yggdrasil's roots responding to the load being placed on the world tree's architecture from above. And across every channel of realm energy, Odin's presence had expanded. This was what Goku had not fully understood until this moment. The distributed awareness he had felt through Valaskjalf's stones and air was not a local phenomenon. It was a sample. Odin's true reach, fully extended and no longer bothering with the performance of restraint, moved through the 9 realms like weather moves through atmosphere. Pervasive and directional, and carrying within it the weight of 9 centuries of accumulated preparation. He was not fighting Ragnarök. He was conducting it, shaping the destruction with the precise, terrible efficiency of a being who had spent longer preparing for this moment than most civilizations had existed. Goku extended his senses fully and found him. Not his body, his presence. Toward that cold and enormous thread of distributed consciousness moving through the realm architecture with the confidence of absolute ownership. It was centered, Goku perceived, not in Asgard, but above it, in a space between realms that Odin had apparently prepared as a position from which the entire 9 realms power architecture could be accessed and directed simultaneously. A conductor's position, a god playing an instrument the size of a universe. "He's not on the ground," Goku said. "He never fights on the ground," Thor said, and his voice carried the weight of a son who had spent a lifetime watching his father operate from positions that couldn't be reached by anything his father hadn't permitted to reach them. "He fights from everywhere at once." "Not everywhere," Kratos said. He was reading the energy shifts with the tactical precision of a general who had fought 2 pantheons and learned that gods, regardless of their power, required a point of contact to apply it. "He needs a focus, a place where his will concentrates into action. Find that and you find where to hit." Goku was already moving, not running, ascending, his Kai releasing from its baseline into the first transformation with a clean, familiar surge of Super Saiyan. Golden light flooding his form, and the air around him crackling with the energetic discharge of a power level that had no precedent in the 9 realms. The realm energy responded immediately and violently, Asgard's territorial frequency spiking against the intrusion of something it couldn't categorize. And Goku rode that spike upward, using the realm's own rejection of his power as a vector, following the resistance to its source the way you follow a current to find where the water is deepest. Below him, Kratos and Atreus moved through the fractured Midgard landscape with the coordinated efficiency of 2 fighters who had spent years learning each other's rhythms. Thor went skyward in a different direction, Mjolnir's return arc carrying him toward Asgard's lower defense architecture, and the lightning that had been threading his skin surface since Muspelheim now released fully. The god of thunder operating without his father's orbit for the first time in centuries, and the difference was extraordinary. Thor at full commitment, fighting for something he had chosen rather than been assigned, was a different order of problem than anything Odin's forces had been designed to contain. Odin's response came in 3 forms simultaneously. The first was the Einherjar, deployed from Asgard in numbers that turned the sky between realms into a geometry of armored bodies and runic weaponry, coordinated with the mechanical precision of an army that had been drilling for this specific deployment for decades. The second was environmental. The realm tiers Goku had seen in Midgard's sky widening, and the energies bleeding through them sharpening from incidental to directed, Odin turning the structural damage of Ragnarok into active weaponry. The third was personal. Odin descended from his conductor's position. He came through the space between realms like a thought becoming action. The transition from distributed presence to focused physical form, happening with a speed that had nothing to do with movement and everything to do with will. He appeared above the fractured Midgard skyline, wearing the full expression of what he actually was. Not the firelit warmth of Valaskjalf, not the measured hospitality of a being performing generosity, but the Allfather in complete operational mode. 9 centuries of accumulated power and knowledge and ruthless cosmic intelligence focused into a single point of intent. He looked at Goku, and his single eye held no performance at all. "You chose poorly," Odin said. "I chose myself," Goku said. "That's not the same thing." He went to Super Saiyan Blue. The God Kai transformation hit the 9 realms power architecture like a stone hitting still water, the ripple of it moving outward through every realm energy channel simultaneously. And what came back was not resistance, but something closer to recognition. The realm energy resonating with God Ki the way Goku had felt it doing since Midgard, but amplified now. The resonance finding harmonics in Yggdrasil's deep architecture that neither of them had designed and neither of them controlled. The world tree was responding to the presence of genuine divine power expressed at full scale, and its response was not alignment with either combatant, but a kind of structural attention. The cosmos orienting toward the point of maximum energy, the way a compass needle orients toward north. Odin felt it, and his expression changed. Not fear, something more complex. The expression of a being whose model of the situation had just revealed a variable he had calculated incorrectly, and who was, despite everything, still primarily a scholar at his foundation. Still primarily a being for whom unexpected data produced a spike of genuine interest before the defensive response caught up. The battle that followed was not a battle in any conventional sense. Odin did not fight physically. He fought architecturally, using the realm energy as his medium, reshaping the environment of the engagement with the precision of someone who had spent 9 centuries learning to make the battlefield itself into an extension of his will. The tears in the sky became walls. The tremors in the ground became directed. The distributed consciousness that moved through every channel of Yggdrasil became a series of simultaneous pressures applied from directions that conventional spatial awareness couldn't track, because they weren't coming from conventional spatial directions. Against a fighter who relied on physical senses, it would have been decisive. Against ultra instinct, it was a language Goku could read. He had ascended to it in the third exchange, not through the rage threshold that had originally unlocked it, but through the meditative depth he had been cultivating since the ridge above the Lake of Nine. The passive mode, the complete sensory openness that processed threat from every direction simultaneously without the bottleneck of conscious decision. Ultra instinct in the 9 realms felt different than it did at home. The realm energy that had been probing and testing his Kai since Midgard was now, at this level of engagement, genuinely integrated. His perception moving through Yggdrasil's channels like water, feeling Odin's manipulations in the moment of their formation rather than their arrival. He moved through everything Odin built before it finished building. The Allfather escalated, drew deeper on the realm architecture than he had in centuries, pulling power from channels that Yggdrasil's structure groaned under the load of redirecting, and the groaning of the world tree was audible across every realm simultaneously, a sound that the Norns at their well felt as physical pain, and that every living being in the 9 realms heard in a register below hearing as pure existential dread. Goku felt the escalation and made a choice, not to match it, to end it. The Kamehameha he released was not the largest he had ever produced. He had done the math, felt the structural tolerances of the Norse cosmos through his integrated ki sense, birched and calibrated it precisely, enough to exceed Odin's focused power output without enough excess to damage Yggdrasil's already stressed architecture further. It was the most precise energy attack he had ever delivered. A column of blue-white Ki that moved through the realm energy channels like a message sent in a language the 9 realms had never heard before, but understood immediately. It struck Odin's focused form at the exact point where distributed consciousness had to concentrate into physical will to apply power. The Allfather came down from between the realms, not destroyed. The 9 realms needed their conclusion on their own terms. The Norns had been clear about that, and Goku had been listening. But defeated, genuinely, completely in the way that mattered. Stripped of the conductor's position, returned to the ground, with the distributed architecture of his consciousness collapsed back into the single point of his physical form, with the forced abruptness of a system shutdown. Below, Kratos was already moving toward that point. Goku descended through the fractured Midgard sky as the realm tears began, slowly to close. The pressure that had been forcing them open reduced. The Norse cosmos beginning the long process of deciding what it was now, that the hand that had been shaping it for 9 centuries had been removed from the mechanism. He landed beside Kratos, and Super Saiyan Blue released. And he stood in base form on the trembling Midgard ground and breathed the ancient, clean, wrong-feeling air of a universe that was not his and felt, running through the realm energy channels around him, the slow pulse of the world tree stabilizing. Thor landed 30 feet away. His armor was damaged in 3 places. His eyes were clear. Atreus was looking at his father with the expression of a son watching a man finally, at enormous cost, closing something that had been open and bleeding for a very long time. The Fimbul winter wind moved through the fractured landscape. Somewhere beneath the Lake of Nine, the world serpent shifted in its ancient stillness. And at the Well of Urd the Norns began their work, and the passage home took 3 days to grow. Goku spent them on Midgard, in the wildwoods near Kratos' house, training in the early Fimbul winter mornings with the focused simplicity of someone returning to fundamentals after a complex engagement. He worked through his forms slowly, feeling how his ki had changed, not diminished, not fundamentally altered, but seasoned in some way he didn't yet have language for. The realm energy of the 9 realms had left something in him, a faint harmonic resonance with Yggdrasil's deep architecture that he suspected would remain long after the passage closed behind him. He sparred with Kratos twice. The second session lasted 40 minutes, which both of them understood as a form of mutual tribute. Atreus gave him a carved piece of Yggdrasil wood on the morning of the 3rd day, small enough to fit in a closed fist and marked with a rune the boy said meant something between witness and survived. Goku held it for a moment and then tucked it into his GI with the careful attention he gave to things that mattered. Thor came on the last evening. He said very little. He sat at the fire outside Kratos' house and drank considerably less than usual, and watched the Fimbul winter sky with the expression of a man beginning, at significant personal cost, Mitjar's the long, difficult work of deciding who he was without his father's architecture to define him against. Before he left, he looked at Goku with the honest directness he'd shown on the volcanic shelf. "You hit harder than anything I've fought," Thor said. "You took it better than almost anyone I've fought," Goku said. Thor nodded once, picked up Mjolnir, left. On the morning of the 3rd day, the Norn sent a signal through the realm energy, a gentle directional pull that Goku felt in his kai like a compass finding north. He stood outside Kratos' house in the gray Fimbul winter light and looked at the man who had walked him through a universe that had been trying to end since before their meeting, and found, as he often did in these moments, that words were both necessary and insufficient. "Thank you," he said. Kratos looked at him with the expression that was not closed and not open, simply present. "You stayed when you could have left," he said. "That is its own answer." Atreus raised one hand. Goku raised one back. He turned toward the pull of the passage, his ki rising into the clean warmth of its natural state, and walked through a door that the world tree had grown specifically for him, between one universe and another, carrying in his ki the faint harmonic echo of 9 realms that would never entirely leave him. Behind him, the passage closed. The Fimbul winter wind moved through the wildwoods. The 9 realms exhaled. Somewhere between universes, Son Goku smiled,